Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Charts with Dan. As you can see, I am not in the home studio. I am on the road in beautiful Burbank, California. Mara and I are doing a little bit of business, some Schmodown stuff, and some appearances on a couple of shows, and then also just some fun, some vacation later this week. So I still wanted to make sure I got the charts done, though, because I love doing this show, and we have a lot to track. This is really starting to feel like the old days because we have week 2 of a big Marvel movie, and people asking, well, how much did it drop? We've got comparisons. We've got anything you want to know about Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. We're also going to be talking about some news that came out about future theatrical windows. Some big movies will be going exclusively into theaters. One notable movie will not. So a lot to break down. Let's get right into it and look at the weekend box office. And we will start with Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings in its second week. $34.7 million in week 2. That amounts to a 54% drop in its second weekend, which is a pretty strong hold considering that it overperformed in its debut. That is the 8th best hold for any film in the MCU. And when we compare that to Black Widow's week 2 drop, as we're looking at this chart here, we have the two 2021 Marvel releases there in orange. You see right there, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, the 8th best drop for an MCU film. And then Black Widow, we talked about this on the show earlier this year, had the worst drop for any movie in the MCU in its second weekend at 68%. That is where I think that we see the impact of the day and date release, with Black Widow being available on Disney Plus with Premier Access, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings not having that availability, and it's really in the second week where we're starting to see that difference. And it's not a big surprise, there's one less place for people to see things, but especially with the pending legal action from Scarlett Johansson, I'm sure her lawyers were very excited to see this number, because let's look at the gross of Black Widow versus the gross of Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. This is cumulative gross, and you'll see Black Widow there in blue, Shang-Chi in orange. Black Widow's first 3 days, it had the lead on Shang-Chi. It had a $10 million higher gross on its opening Friday. It had a $10 million higher gross on its second day, which was a Saturday. There you see on day 3, which was that Sunday, there was still a difference. Black Widow outgrossed Shang-Chi by $5 million, but then we have Labor Day Monday, and that is where Shang-Chi took over. Its gross was over now by Black Widow's $7 million, $94.6 million to Black Widow's $87.5. But you'll see throughout the week they remained pretty close. There was about a $5 million, there was a $6 million difference, then 5, then 4. And then when you look at going into the weekend, Shang-Chi still had a lead there on day 7, but it was a lead of less than $4 million. Look where we are by the end of the weekend on Sunday. Shang-Chi more than triples that lead. It has ended the weekend almost $13 million ahead of Black Widow's gross at the same time after 10 days of release. And if this holds, then we could very well see Shang-Chi ending the summer as the top grossing movie at the domestic box office. And this is what we talk about when we talk about the differences that are made in how you distribute films. This does not take into account the additional revenue that Black Widow made on Disney Plus. We have gotten those numbers, I think one time Disney gave us those numbers that first weekend of Black Widow coming out. So we don't exactly know how much additional revenue Black Widow made. It probably, at this point in its run, has made more money than Shang-Chi when you bring in that revenue. But the fact that it is not exactly off the books, but certainly not public knowledge in most cases, makes it very hard to determine what the success rate is for these movies. With Shang-Chi, it's right there in black and white. We can see it in admissions. We can see it in box office numbers. And that makes things very easy when you're giving things like incentives and even just the public perception of how a film is doing. These are the kind of things that we're going to see studios struggle with and try to figure out over the coming weeks, months, and years. But Shang-Chi also should be noted, a movie that just kind of has better word of mouth than Black Widow. It was a bigger critical hit. It's a bigger audience hit. And so that enthusiasm is also showing in the box office figures. When we look at MCU movies through 10 days, we did a version of this graphic last week through 3 and 4 days. This is the cumulative gross through 10 days domestically, and we see that Shang-Chi at this point outperforming Thor the Dark World at this point in its run. It is trailing about $7 million behind Doctor Strange, less than $20 million behind Captain America the Winter Soldier, besting the runs of Thor the Dark World, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Black Widow, Thor, Captain America the First Avenger, Ant-Man the Incredible Hulk at this point in their runs. We will see how it continues to hold. Could it catch up to Doctor Strange? Could we see it outperforming that? But this is where we are seeing it. It's not performing obviously as big as the biggest box office hits, but especially for a character that people didn't even know, that most people had zero familiarity with going into it. In my opinion, I think the fact that it is performing on the level of a movie, given the challenges that it's also facing, that came out in a non-pandemic time, continues to be a great sign of success. Because if Shang-Chi performs this way, well, then how is Spider-Man going to perform? How is it going to look, I think, if you're Sony and Disney, when perhaps the most established Marvel hero, certainly I think right now with his own movie series, and at a time hopefully again where the pandemic will not be quite as prevalent, where cases will be lower. We certainly hope that that's going to be the case a couple months from now. This was obviously a very positive sign for Disney, because this past week, following the success of Shang-Chi, they made an announcement that their upcoming release slate for the remainder of 2021, all Disney films will be getting an exclusive theatrical window for the rest of the year. Encanto, which is the next movie from Disney Animation Studios, will have a 30-day theatrical window, so it will open on November 24th. It will hit Disney Plus on December 24th, and then Disney has guaranteed a minimum 45-day theatrical window to The Last Duel, Ron's Gone Wrong, Eternals, West Side Story, and The Kingsman. That's the rest of their slate through the rest of the year. Remember, Spider-Man No Way Home is not a Disney film. It is a Sony film, and there's really been no word on that, but the fact that Sony moved Venom up a couple of weeks following Shang-Chi certainly seems to indicate that the studio is high on theatrical distribution. So we've had a major studio here very quickly commit to exclusive theatrical windows through the remainder of the year. However, it was kind of a mixed message, because on the heels of that announcement, there was another announcement that came through. Halloween Kills, which is a big fall title. It was delayed from last year specifically so that it could be placed into theaters at the time. That was the statement that was made. We want people to enjoy this in theaters. Well, they have announced that Halloween Kills will be streaming day and date on Peacock. So the day that it releases in theaters, it will also be made available on Peacock. You can take a lot of potential messages from here, but there's one detail that I wanted to point out that to me indicates what Universal is thinking here and what Comcast, etc., are thinking here, which is that it is not going to be available for all Peacock subscribers. It will only be available to people if you're on the Peacock Premium or Peacock Premium Plus tiers, which are either $5 or $10 a month. And just looking at the fact, when you think about Peacock, it's been, let's be honest, a bit of a laughingstock in the streaming wars. There have been talks that, the launch didn't go particularly well. This to me feels like a subscriber play. This to me feels like a company that says, well, we have a very successful and popular piece of intellectual property. It's a very high-profile film coming out. We want to generate excitement for people to come to our streaming platform, much like Warner Media wanted to entice people to HBO Max with their commitment to release all of their 2021 films on HBO Max. This to me doesn't read so much as a studio that doesn't have faith in theaters or is kind of hedging their bets. I think this is a company that wants to grow their platform, and they have a big movie coming up, and they have now seen an opportunity to make a play. My hope would be that they have worked out the legal things. There's no more kind of loosey-goosey stuff with any of this. You've got to make it right with your creatives, with your stars, etc. But it was disappointing for me to read that, just because it is such a big release. But I don't see this as any kind of blinking red light or indicator that there may be a studio in Universal that's afraid of what's coming with the pandemic and that theaters might close again. I think they want to drive people to Peacock, and that Halloween Kills to them is something that they maybe looked just a little ways down the road right here in Burbank at Warner Brothers and Warner Media and said, maybe we should try that. Maybe I'm wrong, but that is my take on the Halloween Kills situation. Some kind of bad news also for Shang-Chi, not domestically, but if you're talking about a key market for any MCU film, and obviously with Shang-Chi, one that there were high hopes for, China. It was already kind of questionable if Shang-Chi was going to be getting a release date in China. However, there was a resurfaced interview with Simu Liu, who was talking in 2017 about stories that he had heard from his parents about communist China and the fact that it was not a good situation and that there was a lot of suffering, etc. That was resurfaced and passed around Chinese social media, and that is the kind of thing. It's why we don't know about Eternals, and it's what killed the release of Chloe Zhao's Nomadland in China. When those comments come up, whether you made them 1 year ago or 2 years ago or 5 years ago, that can sink the release of your film in China. So it was already kind of dicey. I mean, we have not seen. I was just looking at the Chinese release schedule. There are no Hollywood films currently on the release schedule in China. So we already knew that there were fewer and fewer Hollywood films that were getting Chinese release dates. This is the kind of thing that could completely sink the prospects for Shang-Chi in China. So an already questionable situation got a lot more questionable. If you're Disney, you obviously really want that movie to come out in China. You want every MCU movie to come out in China because it is a very popular market. It is the second most popular market for MCU films generally in the world. And so to lose that market, not just for one MCU film, but potentially for up to 3 this year with Eternals, with Shang-Chi, and also with Black Widow, which currently does not have a date, that is a blow. That is a blow financially, and it's also a blow when you're looking at movies coming up. So that's something to keep an eye on with Shang-Chi. A murky situation just got a lot murkier with those resurfaced comments from Simu Liu just this week. Let's look at the rest of the domestic top 5 and also what was going on this weekend elsewhere around the box office. At number 2 was Free Guy. Free Guy hanging around. It reclaims second place just behind Shang-Chi. Well, not just behind, but behind Shang-Chi and The Legend of the Ten Rings. That has been, I don't know if you would call it a sleeper hit because it's a big movie. It's got a bunch of movie stars in it, but it certainly is a popular hit and one that has had some longevity at the box office. Something else to keep in mind with Free Guy is that we are just 2 weeks away from Free Guy being made available on digital release for people to watch at home, and just a month away from it being out on physical media. It does have that shortened theatrical window, so it is currently at the box office just really almost lockstep with Jungle Cruise when you look at that release. I think that their final domestic totals are going to be very, very close. The question being is the fact that it's going to be available to watch at home in just 2 weeks for some people. If they watch the digital release, will that take a big chunk out of its box office prospects? But I think it is going to be a very close race between Jungle Cruise and Free Guy. They really are just every day just tick, tick, tick so close to each other. That's going to be an interesting one to watch, or at least for, numbers nerds like me. The third place film is *Malignant*, which was actually the lowest opener of James Wan's career as a director. His previous lowest opening was $13.2 million back in 2011 for *Insidious*. This was substantially below that, $5.4 million. Now, the thing that you have to note is that *Malignant* was a day-and-date HBO release. It was available on HBO Max. That surely took a chunk out of its opening weekend audience. However, Samba TV, which, like I've said, they can't measure all devices, but we can at least look at what they can measure and draw some conclusions. They judged that *Malignant* was less than half as popular as The Conjuring: The Devil Made Me Do It was in its opening weekend for the devices that they were able to measure on HBO Max. So it's not like there was a huge group of people that skipped *Malignant* just to watch it at home. I think part of it was probably a lack of awareness on what it was. It's not an established name, and the fact that word of mouth was very mixed on this film. I'm actually anxious to see it because I out here we've been traveling and I had some Schmodown stuff going on. this past weekend, and so Mara and I haven't had a chance to watch it yet. We're going to try to watch it tonight, but all we heard from people was about this insane movie and all the craziness going on with Malignant. So I'm looking forward to watching it here tonight or hopefully tomorrow, and maybe bringing you my thoughts on it here on the channel, because it has been the talk of the town here, but not really the talk of the town many other places. Another horror film, Candyman, in its third week at number 4 with $4.7 million. That is on watch to potentially take that number 10 spot at the summer box office. We're just going to have to see. And then Jungle Cruise, which we just talked about, in its 7th week, still in the top 5. It outlasts Paw Patrol to stay at number 5 with just over $2.3 million. Let's look at the top per theater grosser, and for the second week in a row, it was Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. No surprise there, bringing in $8,070 in 4,300 theaters. Again, a nice shot in the arm for theater owners to have that kind of money rolling in from just one film. Looking at limited release films, so movies that are in 1,000 or fewer theaters, a movie in 580 theaters actually made the top 10 this week. The Card Counter, starring Oscar Isaac. This movie had its premiere at the Venice Film Festival. It's the latest movie written and directed by Paul Schrader, who's of course known for Taxi Driver and more recently for the Ethan Hawke movie First Reformed, amongst others. It grosses over $1 million at the limited release box office. That's always a great number to see. At number 2 is a documentary called The Alpinist in 172 theaters in its first week, over $300,000. This is similar to a movie that I loved called Free Solo, which was about rock climbing. This is about a young mountain climber named Marc-Andre Leclerc. It's basically, I call it Free Snowlo. It's the same type of movie. I think they're going to maybe trying to tap into the popularity of that film. It did well on the limited release circuit there in number 2. The Lost Leonardo stays in number 3 in 217 theaters. That's another doc about the mystery behind an alleged lost painting by Leonardo da Vinci. At number 4 is Small Engine Repair. This is a very small, dark comedy from director John Polano. Comes with endorsements from directors like Edgar Wright and David Gordon Green, Gavin O'Connor. Those are some good people to have behind you and in your corner. In 205 theaters, it made $73,000. And then Un Rescate de Huevitos, which a few people have pointed out translates to a rescue of small eggs, which I know, but I like the Spanish name. Un Rescate de Huevitos in 115 theaters spends its third week in the top 5 here in limited release with $57,000. Let's look at the top 5 internationally. So these are all markets outside of the domestic market. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings was number 1 with $35.2 million, followed by Free Guy, which earned $17.3 million outside of the domestic marketplace. Malignant was at number 3 with $6.3 million. It was one of the I think first mainstream horror films to get a Chinese release in many, many, many years. That's mainly due to the reputation of James Wan. So the fact that even came out in China was a big jump for a horror film. Paw Patrol the movie at number 4, $5.7 million, and Raging Fire at number 5 with $4.7 million. So when you take those international numbers, you combine them with our domestic numbers, you get the top 5 worldwide. At number 1, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings adds almost $70 million to its worldwide total. Free Guy adds another $22.8 million, followed by Malignant at $11.7 million, Paw Patrol the movie just over $8 million, and Candyman, once again driven largely by the domestic box office, is at number 5 with just over $6 million. Now, I know that the summer is over. We're now into September, but I said that we will keep tracking the summer box office because there is a lot of work and positioning still to be done. So let's look at where we stand. There were some changes at the 2021 summer box office. Black Widow, F9, and A Quiet Place Part 2 remain the top 3. However, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings moves up one spot now to number 4. It is within easy striking distance of A Quiet Place Part 2. And like I said, it's less than $40 million away from Black Widow. If it can sustain its popularity, we could very well see this be the number 1 movie of the summer. Jungle Cruise moves down one slot to number 5. Free Guy has passed that $100 million mark, so there are now 6 $100 million grosses at the summer box office in 2020. Cruella, Space Jam: A New Legacy, and The Conjuring: The Devil Made Me Do It are at number 7, 8, and 9. And then at number 10 still is The Boss Baby Family Business. The Suicide Squad is less than $2 million behind it. It is fading quickly, however, at the box office. And then, as I mentioned, I believe less than $10 million behind both of them is Candyman. So if Candyman can maintain its momentum, even with the shortened theatrical window, it could possibly take that number 10 spot. So in the next 2 or 3 weeks, we're going to get a better idea about what that last movie is going to be in the summer 2021 top 10. As of right now, if we look at my predictions, the Suicide Squad is at number 11. I predicted it would be number 2, so that's either going to be it's going to be a big miss either way, but we're going to see if it can sneak into the top 10. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, which I predicted to come in at number 3, looks like it's going to be at least number 3, perhaps number 1. F9 is still in 4th place. My 5th place pick was eliminated weeks ago. Quiet Place Part 2, Free Guy, Jungle Cruise, and The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It all look very secure on the top 10. And then Candyman, which I predicted as number 10, may very well be number 10. We just have to see how it goes as we get through these next couple weeks. Let's look at the 2021 domestic chart, and it is largely made up of movies, of course, from the summer box office. Black Widow, F9, A Quiet Place Part 2. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings moves up 2 spots to number 4. Jungle Cruise moves down 1 to number 5. Free Guy moves up 1 spot to number 6. Godzilla vs. Kong takes a dip, going down 2 slots to number 7, although we now have 7 $100 million grossers in 2021. It's good to see more of these $100 million plus grossers on this list. Obviously, in a different scenario, they would have grossed substantially more, but the fact that we now have multiple films hitting that mark, it just seems like we're getting a little bit back to the way that things were. Cruella, Space Jam: A New Legacy, and The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It are at numbers 8, 9, and 10. When we look at the 2021 worldwide box office, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings makes its debut on this chart. It comes in at number 8. It has surpassed the $257 million mark worldwide. It will probably surpass Free Guy by next week. Cruella gets bumped down 1 spot, as does Chinese Doctors, and Shang-Chi's entry onto the list drops The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It off of the list. The top 7 remain unchanged from last week. Hi Mom, F9, Detective Chinatown 3, Godzilla vs. Kong, Black Widow, A Quiet Place Part 2, and Free Guy. So I'm not really sure how much longer we're going to be able to look at this chart, but let's check out the highest grossers worldwide for the previous 365 days. So if you roll back the calendar to 1 year ago today, these are the top 10 over this past year. Hi Mom, still number 1. F9, Detective Chinatown 3, all 2021 films. Demon Slayer, the movie, the highest grossing movie of 2020, is at number 4, followed by Godzilla vs. Kong. My People, My Homeland, which will rotate off of this list in a matter of days, is at number 6, followed by Black Widow and A Quiet Place Part 2. Then Free Guy is at number 9, and Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, after 12 days of international release, it opened in a couple of markets 2 days earlier than it opened here domestically, comes in at number 10, drops Cruella off of this list, so we now have Shang-Chi joining this list as well of the highest grossers for the previous 365 days. Before we look at what people are watching on the various streaming services at home, I always love to take a look back at a weekend in box office history. We're going back 30 years to the weekend of September 13th through the 15th, 1991, where the number 1 movie in its debut was Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare. They said that it would be both the best Freddy Krueger movie and the last Freddy Krueger movie. It wasn't, and it wasn't, but that's how it was marketed back in 91. So 30 years ago, we saw Freddy Krueger briefly die. Dead again in its 4th week. One of my favorite poster designs. That's such a great one. It's kind of like an optical illusion. You have to take a while to find the profile. In its 4th week was at number 2. The Commitments in its 3rd week at number 5. Terminator 2 Judgment Day, past Labor Day, 11 weeks in the top 5 with $2.4 million at number 4. And in its 7th week, Hot Shots. I prefer the sequel. I prefer Hot Shots Part 2, but Hot Shots in its 7th week still hanging around the top 5 back in 1991. So let's look at what people were watching at home on these various streaming services. And we start, as always, with Amazon. Don't Breathe 2, available on Premium Video on Demand, is at number 1, followed by Stillwater. Jungle Cruise, which is available for purchase still. Respect and A Quiet Place Part 2 round out the top 5. The Green Knight is at number 6. At number 7, you can now purchase F9 and the F9 Director's Cut, because apparently the one that we saw in theaters just wasn't long enough, is available at number 7, makes an entry onto the chart there. Wrath of Man at number 8 comes back onto the chart, available for rental. The Hitman's Wife's Bodyguard at number 9. And we just passed the 20th anniversary of the September 11th attacks here in the United States. The commemorative edition of the documentary 9/11 was at number 10. That's a very powerful documentary, and really, when you talk about New York, in my eyes, the most complete historical record, terrifying, horrifying film, but also just breathtaking in the fact that you had this documentary crew that just happened to be on the ground there. I think really one of the most sadly tragic but also essential views of that day in American history. Let's look at what people were watching on iTunes, and at number 1 is F9, which, as I mentioned, is available for purchase. The Matrix trilogy is at number 2. A lot of people seeing the trailer for Matrix Resurrections this past week and decided to give the original trilogy a buy. The Hitman's Wife's Bodyguard at number 3. The Boss Baby Family Business at number 4. Jungle Cruise at number 5. Wrath of Man, No Man of God, Stillwater, and Don't Breathe 2, all holdovers at numbers 6 through 9. And then entering the chart at number 10, the Mark Wahlberg film Joe Bell, available to buy or rent on iTunes. Let's look at what people are watching on Netflix, and we will start with the service as a whole. At number 1 is the Netflix original movie Kate, which is an action film starring Mary Elizabeth Winstead and Woody Harrelson. What a pair. I might want to check that out. At number 2 is Lucifer, which has transitioned into a Netflix original series. I believe this is the last season that just premiered. It is enough for a number 2 debut. The Netflix series Clickbait and Turning Point 9/11 are 2 holdovers from last week at number 3 and 4. At number 5 is the movie Prey, which is a German film. Back in 1922, deep in King Tut's tomb, explorers unearthed a stone tablet with strange hieroglyphics that translated roughly into one word: Coco Melon. For nearly a century, this discovery has baffled historians and scientists alike, but we now know that this was a premonition from the pharaohs of ages past of the reign of Coco Melon, which sits at number 6 in its 25th consecutive week on the Netflix top 10 streaming charts. Yes, I went back and checked that. At number 7, the Netflix original series On the Verge. At number 8, the movie An Unfinished Life, starring J-Lo. At number 9, the Netflix series Shark Dog. And at number 10, Manifest, which will soon be a Netflix original series. And finally, let's look at what people were watching movie-wise on Netflix. Kate, Prey, and An Unfinished Life are holdovers from the overall Netflix top 10. School of Rock, great Jack Black movie. Richard Linklater, I love that movie, at number 4. The Netflix original film Worth is at number 5. The Netflix original Vivo at number 6. Afterlife of the Party at number 7. Wind River at number 8. Fire Drake the Silver Dragon, which I had never heard of, but I looked up what this movie was, and it was released in Germany as Drachenreiter, which is not a German joke. It actually was released under the name Drachenreiter in Germany. Features voices including Sir Patrick Stewart, Felicity Jones, and Thomas Brody Sangster. That comes in at number 9. So a big week for German films on the Netflix top 10. And then at number 10, the timeless 2004 classic, A Cinderella Story, making its debut on the Netflix movie charts. And that wraps up our look at the past week's box office. Coming up this week, we have 3 movies hitting theaters. We have the Gerard Butler film Cop Shop. We also have the movie The Eyes of Tammy Faye, which is an award season hopeful, and the Clint Eastwood Western Cry Macho, which is another hybrid release between theaters and HBO Max. I am not yet sure if I will be doing a show next week. As I mentioned, Mara and I are going to be taking some vacation later this week, and we're going to be traveling next Monday, so it's very possible that charts may be delayed, I would say probable actually, until next Tuesday, but stay tuned for updates on that. We will continue to track Shang-Chi's box office, and as we go into the fall, will this box office recovery continue? Only time will tell, but it is fun tracking all these movies, and we've got some great ones hopefully on the horizon that we can talk about. Thank you so much for joining me here on the channel. If you want to see even more of what I'm up to, you can check me out on Patreon at patreon.com/Dan Murrell. We do a lot of great stuff, movie club, Schmodown commentaries. We'd love to have you come join the community there. But thank you also for watching me here on YouTube. I will be back with more box office numbers, movie reviews, you name it. We are continuing to grow and evolve the channel. We've got some announcements coming up soon about all my movies, which will be resuming. I'm excited to share that news with you and a lot more. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you next time. Bye.